Hi everyone, my name is Peggy Wu from Raytheon Technologies Research Center. I'm here with my colleague Bruno Abreu-Calfa, and we're here to talk about our project SCOTTIE that's funded by the Department of Energy ARPA-E. Our collaborators include Iowa State University. I want to acknowledge our team members, including the students and postdocs from Iowa State University, as well as Receptivity, who provided some really great advice and support for using their transcription analysis tools. So we'll first give some motivation and background about the project and discuss our human research study, surveys, and transcription results. The big research question here is that we all know there's a difference between in-person meetings and remote. But that's something that's very hard to quantify, and this is an effort to measure what those differences are empirically. We started with a lit review looking at what are some key objectives that people are trying to accomplish when they're communicating with each other, regardless of the domain. And then we took those high-level psychosocial constructs and reasoned about what are some behavioral markers and how we can then measure each of these constructs. We provide a short description of the constructs here, as well as a paper below describing in more detail the definitions of each of these constructs. Your communication performance would depend on your context, and there are many ways to define and many dimensions of context. Here we're focusing on two, agency and virtual body ownership, with the definitions listed here. The task itself is a circuit repair training task, and so we have two people. One is a Confederate trainer and the other is a subject. The Confederate trainer is within this environment, which we call circuit world, providing the participant with a training on how to repair a circuit board. The subject's experiences were separated into one of three conditions, and they were randomly assigned. The first is face-to-face, where the Confederate and the subject were in the room together and sharing a laptop that showed circuit world. In this case, the trainer was in charge of basically driving and providing the training to the circuit repair. Similarly, for the telecom condition, the Confederate and the subject were in different rooms, and they were basically using Zoom and screen share, where again the trainer was driving the experience. And then for XR, or rather VR, both the Confederate and the subject were in a virtual environment. They were each represented with an avatar, and they had the highest level of agency because both the Confederate and the subject can control their own movements and point of view. The data collection procedure first includes subject intake with a demographic survey, and then we schedule their visit one, and during their visit one, we provide a 20-minute circuit world training scenario. At that point, the trainer goes away and the subject remains to do a test, both hands-on repair of the circuit in circuit world, as well as a 12-question multiple choice quiz. We then provide a survey of their experience of each of those comm constructs, and then we wait for between 1 to 2 weeks to schedule another visit where they come back with no refresher training and redo the knowledge quiz and another post survey. We recruited via online through social media, used prolific as well as campus recruiting with a total of 106 subjects. The demographics information are shown here. And the subjects were roughly divided into a third, with 43 subjects in the telecom condition, 31 in the VR condition, and 32 in the face-to-face condition. We collected a variety of data, primarily for the communication objective model for the constructs that make up that model. We relied heavily on survey data, but we also collected objective testbed performance data. We took videos and did behavioral coding of the interactions between the confederate and the participant. And for this, which we then scripted in Boris and did the behavioral coding from the video. But for this presentation, we'll focus on the transcription data. So first, we'll do a manipulation check. So looking across the three different conditions, we see that XR or VR indeed did have the highest rating for virtual embodiment or body ownership. That's on the left in the yellow there. And similarly for the XR or VR condition, subjects also reported highest agency, meaning they felt like they were in control of their own movements in their virtual avatar. We'll look at the survey results, specifically the task-oriented COM constructs, and we'll look at each construct in a little greater detail. Examples from the surveys are listed here in the table. For shared situation awareness, you can see that there's a statistically significant difference between the VR scenario, the one in yellow, with the telecon. There's also a statistically significant difference between the face-to-face and the telecon. So both XR and face-to-face are greater than the telecon, meaning that the subjects reported greater sense of shared situation awareness than the Zoom condition. We see something similar for both these two constructs, the perceived ease of use and the task experience. So you see that for XR, that's greater than telecon. Same with face-to-face is greater than telecon. We did not find any statistically significant differences between the face-to-face and the XR conditions. For mental workload, higher means worse, lower means better. And we're seeing, again, very similar results where XR is better than telecon and face-to-face is better than telecon as well, and no statistically significant differences between XR and face-to-face. Here's another set of task-oriented COM constructs. We looked at the confidence or the self-reported confidence of the subject to do the task after they were trained immediately, and also for their confidence to perform the task in the future, 1 to 2 weeks in the future. For both the confidence to do the task immediately and in the future, we're finding something very similar, where the XR condition is better than telecon, as well as the face-to-face condition better than telecon, but no significant differences between XR and face-to-face. Here we're comparing our initial hypotheses with the actual results from the survey. And in our predictions, we thought that face-to-face would be kind of first place, followed by XR, followed by telecon. And then the results were finding that there was no significant differences between face-to-face and XR, and both of them are better than telecom. Let's look at the social-oriented constructs. For the self-reported engagement levels, you see a difference between face-to-face and Zoom on the chart on the left. Otherwise, no statistically significant differences. And then for self-reported levels of trust of the trainer by the subject, we saw no differences among the three conditions. For self-reported sense of co-presence by the subject, similarly, we saw no statistically significant differences between the three conditions, and same with self-reported rapport. Here we are comparing the results to our initial hypotheses for these social-oriented COM constructs. And you can see on the left that initially For the social-oriented constructs, we thought that face-to-face would perform the best, followed by XR, followed by telecon, and the results are a little different. For co-presence, rapport, and trust, we actually found no differences, whereas we did find some differences in engagement. And now we'll look at the objective performance data in the form of the knowledge quiz, which were 12-item multiple choice questions. And what we found was that there was no statistically significant differences across the 3 different conditions across the telecon, XR, or face-to-face, although subjects all generally performed worse during their second visit. Now, as a reminder, the first visit, we administered this quiz and then we waited a week or so, and they came back to take the quiz again with no refresher training. With respect to the task completion rate as another measure of objective performance data, what we found was that for visit 1, participants that were in either the VR or the face-to-face condition performed significantly better than the ones who were in the telecon condition. For visit 2, it seems like for the retention, the knowledge retention part of it, there was no difference across the conditions. So to summarize, for the task-oriented construct survey results, there were no statistically significant differences between VR and in-person, and both of them performed better than Zoom. This is pretty consistent with what we have found from other studies in the literature, where VR seems to be performing with no big differences with in-person conditions. For social-oriented constructs, we did find a difference in the level of engagement, but otherwise no significant differences in the sense of co-presence, rapport, and trust. Now, this is surprising because generally you might think that you could build rapport and trust and the sense of co-presence better when you're in person, but that was not the finding that we were getting from our results. For knowledge retention, we see a general decrease of knowledge retention with time, which is, again, not surprising. But we didn't find any statistically significant differences between the conditions. And so this means if, at least if within the context of our experiment, if you're training in VR, then, the knowledge retention is the same as over Zoom or even in person. For an objective task performance, we found that subjects generally performed better during their first visit, as well as if they were doing the training in VR or in face-to-face, and that the subjects also were able to complete the task quicker when they're using the XR, VR, or the face-to-face condition.
This slide shows 2 pipelines, one for natural language processing or NLP feature extraction, and another for machine learning predictive models for communication constructs. The main idea is to obtain a correlation between numerical features that we extract from utterances as they relate to communication constructs that are defined as average scores of answers to a questionnaire. As you can see, we investigated a number of different approaches for feature extraction of text data. The output is a numerical array, so an array of numerical values that can be used as inputs for machine learning regression models. We investigated different machine learning regression models ranging from ensemble-based models to neural networks, support vector machines, and others. Each one of those models they typically have hyperparameters that can be tuned, and we used Bayesian optimization to tune them in order to minimize the total mean absolute error between their predictions and the target data coming from the communication constructs, again, as defined by average scores of answers. One of the natural language processing approaches that we use in this work is called Linguistic Inquiry and Word Count, or LUC, which is a word counting software that uses a dictionary containing words that belong to over 90 psychological, linguistic, and topical categories, which indicate various social, cognitive, and affective processes. We actually used an application programming interface, or API, provided by Receptivity, in which we would provide the transcript data as text, and we got back the numerical features calculated by Luke. So here are some overall statistics of our data sets. We had a raw count of 120 transcripts, out of which 50 were Zoom transcripts, 37 were XR, and 33 were face-to-face. And the final data set, after we merged NLP-generated features, Luke features, and survey data, and of course dropping some records that had very few utterances in them, we ended up with 102 records, 40 were Zoom, 31 were XR, and 31 were face-to-face. And the NLP pipeline produced a total of 197 numerical features, which were used as inputs to the machine learning regression models. These two figures show the number of utterances of subjects on the left and of trainers on the right as bar plots, and also for each condition, Zoom, XR, and face-to-face. And the main takeaway here is that the trainers were more or less consistent. As you can see, the bars were more or less on the same level and with a similar spread. But whereas for the subjects, there were a larger spread in terms of number of utterances for XR and face-to-face conditions. So this bar chart is a different way of visualizing the same information as in the previous slide, but with more detail. The horizontal axis are the transcript IDs, whereas the vertical axis contains the number of utterances as in the previous slide. And the color coding here is as before. We have Zoom, XR, and face-to-face. And the main takeaway here is that all the conditions are represented in all range of transcripts. So you see the three colors appearing on the right-hand side of this chart and also on the left-hand side. So fewer utterances to medium number of utterances to relatively larger number of utterances for all conditions. And this is yet another way of visualizing the same information, where we have, again, in the horizontal axis, the transcript IDs. On the vertical axis, we have the number of utterances. But now we're breaking down the data by utterances by trainer in blue and utterances by subject in green. And for sort of half of the transcripts, we have a larger number of utterances by the trainer. But then as you go to the right side of this chart, you will see that there's 50-50 between utterances for trainer and subject. And there was one case over the left-hand side here that we saw a much larger number of utterances by the subject compared to the trainer. And finally, these two tables summarize the machine learning results, where we list the best machine learning model we obtained after hyperparameter tuning with Bayesian optimization for each communication construct, as well as the mean absolute error, or MAE, value. We should note that the target values were scaled between 0 and 1, which means that on average, the absolute error across these 12 communication constructs varied between 11% to 22%. And we should also note that there was not a machine learning model that outperformed all of the other ones for all communication constructs. And some last words on our machine learning findings for this work. One could argue that the mean absolute error values shown in the previous slide were relatively high, which would indicate a low correlation between linguistic features we extracted from transcript data and survey responses. And we attribute that to a few things. One is that there was little to no socializing between trainer and subject before and after training. Another is that most utterances from the subject were typically one or two words, for example, yeah, no, uh-huh. And finally, the subject had little to no time or cognitive resources to express engagement, rapport, trust, co-presence, and so forth. And we think that interactions that are lower in cognitive workload or richer in social exchange may provide more opportunities for us to obtain a higher correlation between these linguistic features and the server responses.